The 8 early warning signs of a disrupted gut flora. If you're experiencing bloating, diarrhea, constipation, and already know you have a gut flora issue, stick with this video. I'll show you additional symptoms, like the distant effects of the gut, which you might have and not even associate with your disrupted gut flora or your digestive issues. Welcome to this video. My name is Dr. Ulrich Selz. I'm a practicing physician and I had severe gut problems as a teenager myself. Fortunately, I was able to solve the problem with the right doctor, and in this video I want to talk about what early symptoms a disrupted gut flora can have and which. Symptoms you have but still don't associate with the flora or with gut health. Let's get started. Let's briefly talk about why do we get bloated. We have so many people in our country suffering from bloating, and they've been taught by their parents who told them as children, bloating is just normal. And that's true. To a certain extent, bloating is... Some bloating throughout the day is normal, but beyond that, and that's what we're discussing today, bloating is not normal. How does it happen? The cause is usually found in the gut flora, meaning the good microbes are missing, the bad ones proliferate, and there are simply microbes that can produce gases, methane gas. So when we have really severe bloating with very bad smells, those are methane gases being produced, or for example, Clostridia or other bacterial groups that produce bloating. And many people then change their diet thinking that will solve it. No, such microbes need to be eradicated. I've made many other videos on this topic. They can certainly cause abdominal pain as well. Back when I was an anesthesiologist, we often had patients admitted with severe abdominal pain, sometimes accompanied by constipation and similar symptoms. No one could find anything wrong. Eventually they tried to resolve it surgically, and after the anesthesia, a massive bowel movement would occur, freeing up the intestines. So this can also cause really severe symptoms if the intestines are blocked, meaning if the bacteria or the motility, the bowel movement, isn't functioning perfectly, leading to feelings of fullness and so on. By the way, there's an interesting phenomenon when it comes to constipation. Many people experience irregular bowel movements, meaning they might have abdominal twinges, pain, or be constipated for a few days, and then this plug resolves. They have what seems like a nice stool consistency, so they have a formed stool, and then the bowel movement that follows, which they might need to have again within 1 to 3 hours, is unformed, and after that comes diarrhea, a so-called overflow diarrhea. It's like a plug clogging the intestinal tubi, and when it overflows, so to speak, that's when you first get the solid bowel movement, and then the diarrhea follows. So this is something that's commonly found. Let's talk about early warning signs. One of these symptoms is often an increased sensitivity to certain foods. We're not talking about allergies here, and we're not talking about food intolerances either. Instead, we might be talking about a glass of sparkling wine that hits you harder, or a pizza that doesn't sit as well, leading to digestive issues, or perhaps the next day your stool is very mushy. What am I getting at? I'm suggesting the possibility of an emerging histamine intolerance or an elevated histamine level that is continuously produced by the gut flora. What does that specifically mean? Histamine is essentially one of the substances or reasons why we have refrigerators, why we need to store food properly. It means histamine is a substance that forms during decay. When foods get old, when they rot, or when they age for a long time, like salami, ham, red wine, cheese, and these substances can greatly disrupt our health, it's the substance that is released or excreted in people with allergies. It's stored in our large mast cells. Allergies, or the triggering of allergies, are like a red panic button, and the rockets then shoot up into the air. And histamine can be produced in 2 ways. First, as mentioned, through a maturation process when it comes from the outside. We know, for example, tomatoes or strawberries, which are histamine-rich foods, and when the gut bacteria themselves, the disturbed gut flora, also produce histamine, and then if these 2 causes meet, it can backfire quite literally. Because the constantly produced histamine from the gut flora meets additional histamine that is introduced from the outside, which maybe 3 to 5 years ago was completely well tolerated, but now leads to problems. Why? because the flora constantly produces this histamine 24/7 without us noticing. And as I've hinted at before, the following germs can do this. A common question is, how does one get these putrefactive germs? What's the cause? And the cause, or causes, can be quite varied. Firstly, we know this from chemistry and from the universe. The universe tends toward disorder, and the same is true for our gut flora. So we have very good studies from universities, from international researchers who have looked into which direction our gut bacteria tend to go. And it's simply a realization that as babies, we don't yet have a fully developed flora, and then as teenagers and adults and so on, if everything goes normally, the flora develops in its full spectrum. Ideally, it should be as diverse as possible in the bacterial world, with between 400 and 600 different species, several pounds of gut bacteria living inside us, which then need the right food. And here's one of the reasons. If they get the wrong food, then bacteria species that we already have inside us can develop into so-called putrefactive germs. And these putrefactive germs really stir up trouble, quite literally. They can produce gases and also develop substances that disrupt the flora to some extent, responsible for the fact that bowel motility is no longer good. This means that constipation can occur. It's possible that they acquire these putrefactive germs due to an infection. So I had a lot of COVID patients who developed a disruption of the gut flora because of the coronavirus. There was a time when a variant was active that was strongly associated with diarrhea. And then think about all the medications taken. Of course, the antibiotics. Everyone knows they can damage the gut flora to some extent. Not every antibiotic is equally bad, by the way, and then many painkillers or corticosteroids or even stomach protectors, they disrupt this environment and are capable of causing all sorts of problems. When we have these problems, we come to the next early symptom, which can be a nutrient deficiency. And how many patients I have with iron deficiency, with selenium deficiency, with zinc deficiency, and so on. And the first thing I do, I look at the gut flora. And what are the connections here? So if you have a silent problem with the gut flora and you have putrefactive bacteria sitting on it, or for example, you have a fungal infection in the gut, or simply the natural turf is too low, then it can lead to the nutrients not being properly absorbed. And the connection is actually easy to understand, because if there are disturbances in the flora, then there's a slight irritation, yes, on an immunological level or directly on the mucous membrane. And this irritation leads to the absorption of substances not functioning properly anymore. Here, we must think not only of vitamins and minerals, but also of amino acids. The uptake of amino acids, of proteins, is no longer properly ensured, and in this way it can ultimately lead to immune disorders. And what I very often see are disturbances in the iron metabolism. Iron is a huge problem. Numerous women face challenges related to iron deficiency. Why is this the case? They go through menstrual bleeding, resulting in a significantly higher iron loss each month compared to men. Additionally, disruptions in gut flora can worsen problems with iron balance. Even though women make an effort to address this through their diet, iron absorption might still decline. As previously stated, this can lead to a weakened immune system. So, there are the most amazing connections between the gut and the immune system. There's a very close relationship. First, there's the barrier function, since the gut flora is also a point of contact with the outside world, with the food we need to live. And it's a huge contact surface area, about 3/4 to a full tennis court in size, depending on which literature you read. That's how large the gut flora is, and there's a whole lot of immunological signaling going on. This means the gut flora receives a variety of stimuli, gets lots of information, a lot of input from the outside world, and can then respond to this input. So viruses and bacteria get in no matter what you eat. There are always fungal spores or something entering our system, and the gut flora has a very sophisticated system. Approximately 70 to 75% of immune cells live in the Peyer's patches. You can think of Peyer's patches like French baguettes, located just about 1 mm to 2 mm maybe beneath the surface of the intestine. like a network of tubes. That's where our immune cells reside. It's no coincidence that the body has relocated so many immune cells into the gut flora, if you will. Because here we have this contact surface. And that's where a lot of immune factors are built up. So to speak, cells that gather information, relay information, so that in the thymus gland or other immune organs, the soldiers, so to speak, the cells that then throw themselves into battle are prepared. Foreign invaders seek and eliminate, ensuring they are properly informed. That's one way to think about it. And here, the gut flora has a tremendous influence. Naturally, this relates to allergies. In other words, if I constantly receive misinformation, like if I always eat a food that, let's say cow's milk, which has a high allergenic potential. Cow's milk has a high allergenic potential. There are many people allergic to cow's milk. Why? Because cow's milk contains a complex protein composition. Now, if there's a problem with the gut flora, meaning if the colonization is too low, if there are putrefactive bacteria present, if there's always a slight irritation, then the body naturally ramps up its defense systems and becomes extremely sensitive in the immune system, especially when constantly exposed to foreign proteins. I once had a patient who, and please don't be shocked, drank 8 liters of milk. That's over 2 gallons daily for decades. You can imagine how physically ill this woman was. She had severe obesity, incredible water retention, a serious lymphatic issue, and so on. For decades, she massively overloaded her immune system with these foreign proteins. She did that, by the way, because her mother told her milk was so healthy. So that was the reason for poisoning herself with so much milk. These misinformations or inaccuracies, if the flora, if the world down there isn't functioning well, then an excessive number of immune responses are triggered, and these excessive immune responses can ultimately lead to an allergic state. For example, the histamine level is increased, certain immunoglobulins, certain defense strategies are formed, and it could very well be that they then experience their first year of hay fever or their first year of dust mite allergy. So an allergy that moves away from the stomach and appears on the face, for instance, or they might start having trouble tolerating certain foods, or they react to plastics or something else. In other words, there's an increase in the predisposition to allergies. What must we differentiate from this? Food intolerances are often placed in the same category, but that's not quite accurate. Allergies operate through the molecule immunoglobulin E, and food intolerances through immunoglobulin G. So there's a significant dispute between rapidly evolving modern laboratory diagnostics and conventional medicine. Conventional medicine says no, they don't believe in food intolerances. They say they don't exist because they're not classic allergies. But I think we need to move away from that mindset and accept both, saying, okay, there are allergies that cause immediate explosive symptoms, typically triggered by pollen or whatever. And then we have food intolerances where there's an incredible immune response. Experience a burst of sensations as the food journey begins in the gut through the digestive tract, leading to the eventual onset of food intolerance hours later. This process is intricately linked to the immune system. Amid the COVID era, numerous studies highlighted the benefits of initiating therapy or enhancing gut flora in severe patients, resulting in reduced symptoms and faster recovery compared to control groups. Another intriguing subject is the correlation between depression, melancholy, and gut health. Why does this connection exist? We have a significant task ahead within our gut flora, which is carried out by our bacteria. This task involves producing butyric acid, also known as butyrate. Butyrate is a substance that has a very strong anti-inflammatory effect, which we'll get back to in a moment. It also regulates our brain health, for example, can reseal our gut flora, and generally butyrate protects us from colorectal cancer. So there's a lot of data on this topic. Butyrate is essentially the substance that the gut flora is intended to produce. And if this butyrate, it's one of the short-chain fatty acids, If these fatty acids are not properly produced in the gut flora, then further problems can arise. This includes reduced production of neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and such. These brain neurotransmitters that we're familiar with are actually also produced in the gut flora or generally in the gut, and so we have a significantly higher. More communication goes from the gut to the brain than from the brain to the gut. That's something to grasp. So, if you learn to listen to your gut brain, you're really taking a big step forward because you've learned to trust your gut, and that's without a doubt, it's processing a larger amount of data, let's say. It's the bigger storage. So ever since I've known this, I rely 100% on my gut brain. If something's off there, then I know there's no need to even involve my little brain upstairs. So this beauty rate, these neurotransmitters, they're simply crucial for our brain health, and they play a significant role in ensuring that I implore you to steer clear of succumbing to the depths of depression. Regrettably, there is research indicating that individuals grappling with depression typically display low levels of specific parameters. Conversely, studies point towards the restoration of gut flora balance as a means to elevate these parameters, subsequently enhancing mental well-being. Body rate also contributes to combating inflammation, including silent inflammation, a term you may have encountered. This silent form of inflammation is frequently overlooked as an early indicator of an imbalance in gut flora, which is unfortunate. Because initially there are no symptoms, there's a silent inflammation. The inflammatory markers, they do rise, but not so dramatically that you feel as ill as you would with pneumonia or tonsillitis. Instead, they just increase within a certain range, and then they start affecting the blood vessels. Damaged, they attack the vessels, and we see an increased tendency toward arteriosclerosis and these vascular diseases. But what can also happen is that you simply develop symptoms like joint aches, joint pains, soft tissue rheumatism, and such things, where they don't even consider that their gut flora might have a leaky gut syndrome, meaning a symptom of a permeable intestine. So when these proteins or this barrier function isn't working properly, foreign proteins can pelt down on our flora, on our immune system like hail. And this is something that happens very, very quietly. That's why it's really called silent inflammation. There's a parameter, the high sensitivity CRP value or procalcitonin. These are two blood markers that sensitively indicate that we can make this silent inflammation audible, meaning we can detect it. And then as soon as you see there's silent inflammation, the next logical step is taken, and that's the examination of the gut flora. How do you examine the gut flora? There are already some great tests, and by now we know exactly what's going on with the gut. The price ranges from about 120 to 130 euros. There are two distinct testing strategies available. One involves analyzing the DNA of gut bacteria, which is considered a more contemporary approach. However, this method is slightly less sensitive due to the temperatures and the transportation to the lab. And then there's the classic test, where the stool is applied to agar-agar plates, which are then placed in an incubator. So we know exactly what's going on with the gut flora. By the way, it's not true, as often claimed, that this is just a snapshot, a detailed excerpt. Only people who don't work with gut flora could say such a thing. No, it actually reflects the last weeks and months, because if you're involved in therapy, you know that the gut flora here isn't something that changes just like that. Repairing it over the weekend is not possible, so rebuilding the gut often takes about 3 to 6 to 9 months, depending on the case. Of course, you'll see improvements along the way, but it can take up to a year for the flora to be fully restored. In very complex or particularly difficult cases, like people who have been in intensive care or have undergone major surgeries, it might even take a year and a half. Another point is the food coma, the issue of fatigue. You might be familiar with that. If you find yourself feeling fatigued after a meal and need an extra cup of coffee to stay alert, it could be a sign of disrupted gut flora. This strain on your liver is often caused by inefficient nutrient absorption processes, leading to the need for additional stimulation in your body to stay awake. If the nutrients we absorb encounter our detoxifying organ, the liver, it can become too much for it. It might also be related to blood sugar levels. This regulation between blood sugar, gut flora, breaking down sugar quickly in the gut or absorbing it slowly, leads it to the liver rapidly or slowly, and toxins enter. So, it's a play of multiple factors that can cause this fatigue. And if there are disturbances here, including with the liver, you might find that after eating, you quickly drop into low blood sugar, and that's when you feel tired. Or if you have allergies, you might feel tired because your immune system is at work. When histamine levels rise, you just get tired. So always keep the liver in mind. And secondly, think about the gut flora. And finally, as a last early warning sign, there are people who have a hard time gaining weight and a hard time losing it. Gaining weight is somewhat understandable. If I have a disturbed gut flora, then essentially the same principle applies that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that nutrients can be poorly absorbed. But what about weight gain? What about people who can't lose weight? And here, the gut flora is also involved. There are two types of bacteria, firmicutes and bacteroidetes, at play. And these two groups, are responsible for ensuring that carbohydrate digestion runs optimally. And if this ratio is off, then what happens is you might eat whole grain bread, for example, a slow carbohydrate, but these nasty gut bacteria convert that carbohydrate into quick sugars. In other words, you're eating healthy, you're buying everything organic, everything checks out, but this conversion is essentially the turbo booster for building up fat tissue. So the gut flora needs to be examined as well. And when it comes to weight gain, it's often this silent factor that prevents people from shedding pounds despite dieting, switching to a Mediterranean diet, and so on. So that's it for this video. Thanks for listening. Check out the next video. Subscribe to the channel. It's free, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then.